the notification, we can proceed to the session first. So first we'll do the breakout rooms and mock interviews. And let me share the link for that as well.
Let's do this.
Yeah. Hi, Olin. Can we go to the breakout rooms now?
Yes, I've opened the rooms.
Okay, thanks.
Hi.
Hey Yash. Hey all. So for those people who don't know me, my name is Caren. So I'm one of the instructors for this CodePath class. You're probably not going to see me until like 2 to 3 weeks from now. But I know you guys kind of were just like thrown in the wild and thrown into the breakout rooms to do your mock interview sessions. So I kind of just wanted to give everybody a bit of wrap up on binary trees. So binary trees, oh, okay, let me start a little about me. I was going to save this for 2 weeks from now, but I'll just start now. So I'm currently, last year I actually taught this CodePath class. So I actually taught this binary trees originally last week. Right now I'm teaching a different intermediate class. So it's a little bit less advanced in this class. So if you're in this class already, congratulations, because we already think you're pretty advanced. So we already think you're already ready for like technical phone screens for most internships. This class is mostly preparing you to really ace like all the top level companies, right? So I'm currently working at Google as an Android engineer, and I actually did the recruiting process like 2-3 months ago. So it's a bit fresh in my mind right now. So if you have questions, definitely feel free to reach out to me. But yeah, I wanted to ask how everybody is feeling about this class right now and how everybody is feeling about binary trees specifically. So I know for me, at least, back when I was doing all these coding interviews, I get like really nervous when I get a binary trees problem, right? Because binary trees is one of those data structures that I don't work very familiar all the time with. So I'm not as familiar with binary trees as I am with strings and arrays. So I get like really nervous, even if someone just like goes up to the whiteboard and says, hey, we have this binary tree. I immediately like kind of freeze up, right? So I wanted to see how everybody else is feeling about binary trees right now. Yeah, you should only be able to see like a couple weeks in advance. The weeks in the future are locked out for now until they get closer. Is it a bad idea to solve a problem recursively, or is iteratively preferred? Yeah, this is a great question. So especially for binary trees, a lot of times it's a lot easier to solve it recursively, right? Iteratively oftentimes is not the straightforward approach, but so one of the things you want to talk about with your interviewer as you're going through the process of understanding the question and coming up with a solution is you might ask, hey, how big can this binary tree be? Like how many nodes can we expect in this binary tree? Because if this binary tree has like 1 million nodes or something ridiculously big and you're solving it recursively, what can happen is you could get this like out of memory error where while you're doing your recursive function, you keep on keeping track of all these things that you keep doing recursively, right? And if you have 1 million nodes and things are going to get out of hand and you could get an out of memory exception. So that's not good. Iteratively can be preferred. So I think this is one of the things where you always just want to be in constant communication with your interviewer. Like, hey, I have this recursive approach in mind. Do you think that would be a good idea to code up? Or should I expect an input that's going to be really big where I might get an out of memory exception? So that's the thing that you might want to discuss with the interviewer before you actually implement your approach. Let's see. So I think the main thing for binary, so something that helped me get a little bit more comfortable with binary search trees and feel more confident is knowing a couple of things really well. So you definitely have to know really well how to do a binary, a depth first search and a breadth first search. Like you just have to know it on the back of your hand. You should be able to do it like in 5-10 minutes. Just do it like repeatedly for like 10 times and then you'll get really good at it. Once you could do a depth first search and a breadth first search really well, almost all problems involve that, right? So you want to be able to do those really well. The other thing you want to be able to do really well is in order traversal, pre-order traversal, and post-order traversal. So be able to know like when should you use those 3 traversals, like what kind of order does those 3 traversals give you, and when is the best times when you want to use each of those traversals. Like if you want to examine the leaves before or the roots before its children, which traversal should you use? So knowing those 3 traversals and knowing depth first search and breadth first search really well will really help you get through literally 90% of binary tree questions. And in terms of recursive and iterative, if you can do those traversals recursively is usually how people do it, but if you could also do it iteratively, that would also like really just get you through almost all binary tree questions. Yeah, so if you don't get anything out of this binary trees week, try to just get really good at like doing breadth first search, depth first search, pre-order traversal, post-order traversal, and in-order traversal. Just do those traversals like a couple times, and then you'll feel more comfortable doing at least those traversals. And then when you see a problem, you can think to yourself, oh, okay, would it be helpful if I did a depth first search in this situation? Or would it be helpful if I did an in-order traversal for the situation? Usually 90% of the time, one of those traversals is what you need to solve the problem, at least in one way, right? Let's see. So I think the trick, so someone's like, I don't feel too comfortable with binary trees yet, but you feel like you have improved. So the trick is that I feel like nobody ever feels 100% confident in anything, right? How many people still, like I still go into interviews thinking I'm only, like my confidence level right now is probably only like 60% as I go into interviews, right? It's really, really hard to feel super confident going into any interviews, no matter like how much you study and how much you prepare, right? So just like getting a poll, like what's your I would like to hear from people in the chat where your confidence level is as you go into interviews. If you're going to phone interview, like how confident do you feel like you're gonna ace it right now? Solid 25. These, so 50-50 is already pretty good. At least for me, when I was coming out of college, my confidence level was literally like maybe 10%. Like I thought I was gonna fail every phone screen. I was so nervous going into every phone screen, so nervous going into every interview. I had like no confidence level. Even now, after I studied LeetCode extensively for like 1 to 2 years, I still have the idea in my mind that, hey, I'm gonna see some kind of question that I've never seen before. I'm gonna forget something as I get really nervous. So it's really hard to be like really confident, right? I feel like if you're at the 40-50% level, that's already a pretty good place to be at. Another thing I want to bring for everybody here is that you're already in this advanced class. So we already sorted you to be like really advanced students in doing these kind of algorithms. So you're actually a lot better than you think you are, which is which is like one of the things that a lot of people have problems with, right? Not being confident, even though you are actually really good. People are usually not as good as they think they are. So give yourself more credit for what you already know. I'm going to read some of these other questions that people have been posting. So if you don't feel too well about getting a tree, so getting a tree to be balanced. So inserting a tree and still asserting a node into a binary search tree and still keeping it balanced is actually really hard. It's definitely really useful to practice it, but it's definitely a really more advanced technique. So definitely try to practice more with it. But I would try to actually focus on getting those medium questions really well. So a lot of people, I think one of the problems that a lot of people face is that they try to just go for the hard questions on LeetCode, right? So you look at the hard questions on LeetCode and you think, okay, if I could just solve the hard questions, I could probably solve all the other questions. But that's probably not the right way to study, because the most important thing is to get the fundamentals down, right? So if you're feeling like a little bit uncomfortable with the hard questions, try to just go through the medium questions and get a really good sense of how to solve the medium questions. And once you're really, really good at medium questions, then you move on to the hard questions. I wouldn't suggest moving on to the hard questions before you're ready for it, just because one, it could be really frustrating. And also hard questions don't come up as often as medium questions. So if you're really good at medium questions, chances are you might have a better idea of how to go about solving the hard question too. Let's see. How can you prepare with binary search trees for, yeah, I could provide a list. So maybe I'll compile a list of like my top 10 favorite binary search tree questions, and then I'll post it in the Slack channel. How did I get from 10% to 60%? So I think the one thing that people don't tell you is you really just gotta like do LeetCode religiously. Like unfortunately, LeetCode is very heavily used in interviews, and some people may be like, oh yeah, but that's like not what I'm gonna do every day, right? I wanna do front-end web development. I just need to be really good at like making web pages and making all these UI stuff. But LeetCode, I think, is the best bang for your buck, because you can almost be sure that any interview round you go through, no matter if it's a big company, a small company, they're going to ask some kind of leak code question, right? It's going to be some kind of problem thinking, data structures, seeing how well you can gather requirements for a problem and then go about solving it. So really just like honing down and say, okay, I'm going to do 2 leak code questions a day, and that's going to be my goal for the summer. And it's a pretty simple goal, right? Because you really just have to set aside an hour for leak code. Just don't watch like some extra episodes of a TV show you like, or don't try to like waste too much time on Facebook or something. And then you can sit down and do 2 leak code problems a day. By the end of the week, you'll have 14 questions already. And then by the end of the month, you'll have done like 60 questions. So the more questions you do, the more comfortable you're going to feel with it. And then soon you're going to be like, oh, okay, I've seen all these questions. These questions are all following the same kind of pattern. There really can't be that many surprises when I go into an interview, right? That's kind of how I got my confidence level up. Do you need to know about AVL and red black trees? So I would say like 98% of the time, most interviews get are not going to be asking about like self-balancing trees. So don't worry too much about it. Try to focus on like the fundamentals. And then if you have like some extra time and you're really like into binary trees, then definitely go for it. But don't ask too much about it. Google does ask a lot of binary tree questions. So Google's favorite kind of questions, I think, are binary trees and graphs. I feel like those are some of their favorite kind. And of course, like strings and arrays, right? So what do you do if you literally don't understand the question? Yeah, that's the question. That's a problem I face a lot too. So sometimes you can get a bad interviewer, you can get a good interviewer, right? A lot of it is up to the luck of the draw, whether you get a good interviewer or a bad interviewer, whether you get a question you've seen before or you haven't seen before. So a lot of times when I don't understand like what they're trying to ask, I'll do something like, okay, so I'll just try to write, the first thing I'll do is I'll try to write out the method signature. Like, okay, what does this method take in? And what kind of data does it return? So does this method take in like 2 arrays and returns another array? Or does this method take in a binary search tree and return and something from that, like a Boolean or another binary search tree? So the first thing is I try to write out the method signature just to get, so we're on the same page, right? Once I do that, then I try to give the interviewer some example inputs and outputs. I'd be like, okay, so given this input, is this the output that we would expect? So once I go through a couple of those, like a couple examples of inputs and outputs, then I can start getting a better idea of, oh, okay, this is the problem we're trying to solve. And as I'm giving them examples of what I think should be the input and output, this is when they can try to correct me and be like, oh, no, that's not actually what would output from this example input. And then as we're working through those inputs and outputs, then we both have a better understanding of where we're coming from. Does that kind of make sense? So basically trying to clarify what the question is actually trying to ask by giving example inputs and outputs. Yeah, it's definitely happened to me a lot where I actually solved the wrong problem. So I've gotten so far to the point where the interviewer gives me a question, I'm like, I've seen this problem before, like I'll just code it up. And then at the like 30 minutes later, the interviewer goes, wait, that's not actually what we were trying to solve. Like the array is not actually sorted, so you can't assume these kind of things. So before you even try to start coding and before you even talk about like potential approaches of how to solve a problem, you really want to make sure that you and an interviewer are both trying to solve the same question. So asking clarifying questions like, oh, okay, can I assume that, you know, this is a binary search tree and not just a binary tree? And can I assume that, what else? Can I assume maybe if it's an array input that it's always going to be sorted? So really clarifying with those kind of questions, I think really helps get you and the interviewer on the same page so you're not solving different problems. How do you decide between a depth first search and a breadth first search? I think, yeah, I guess that's kind of hard question to answer. How do I determine? Let's see. I think usually I try to determine, oh, okay, does it matter like what kind of order I need to see the nodes in? Or does it matter if I need to look at the leaves first before the roots? Because if I need to somehow examine the leaf nodes before the root nodes, then I want to do a depth first search, right? If I want to like look at all the roots first and all the parents first, then I want to do something like a breadth first search. So I kind of have to see, okay, this problem requires me to look at all the leaf nodes first. So for example, if I wanted to get the sum of all the leaf nodes in a binary search tree, I probably do a depth first search, right? Because I wanted to, well, I guess it doesn't matter. But yeah, that's not a good example. I'll think of a better answer for that. Oh, does Amazon ask about Dijkstra now? That's pretty intense. I've never interviewed for Amazon before, so I don't really know like what kind of questions they ask. That's pretty intense that I would ask about those kind of algorithms. Should you tell the interviewer if you've seen the question before? Yeah, that's a good question too. I feel like that happens to me a lot. So oftentimes the interviewer might say a question I've seen before, and it might be like really similar to something I've seen, and I'll literally tell them, hey, I've seen something really similar to this question before. And then most of the times what they're going to say is, oh, okay, well, let's work through it anyway, because they might give you a question that's really common, but they have these like extra follow-ups and twists that change the problem in different ways. So they still want you to go through the initial step, but you should definitely bring up, oh, okay, I'm kind of familiar with this problem already because I've solved like least common ancestor for a binary tree or something. So definitely bring it up, just so they're aware, so they're not like, oh, this person like already knew this problem and then tell me about it and solved it within 10 minutes. So that's definitely like not as good of a thing to do, right? Let's see. Yeah, any other questions about binary search trees, binary trees, or just in general? I'm happy to answer questions in general if you have questions about like, hey, how does something about this in this class works? Or hey, how did you get an internship or anything else? It is 12 o'clock though, so I want to let everybody else who doesn't have the time to stay, feel free to drop off the meeting if you don't have time, but we'll continue next week with another class session. So see everybody else on Tuesday, but if you want to stay around and ask some general questions, I'll be around to answer questions. How's Google? Google's pretty cool. The food is really good. Everybody's really smart and really nice. It's everything that everybody has told you about, I think. Do you have any list of LeetCode problems? I did have a list of LeetCode problems by topic. I think what I generally like to do is, for example, so what I did when I was studying for interviews was I thought about the specific topics I didn't feel comfortable in. So it's like linked lists and then binary trees. And then I went on LeetCode and I filtered questions by that specific category. And then I sorted it by the frequency of how much that problem is seen, and then try to work through those. Because if you sort each topic by its frequency, usually like the top 10 to 20 questions follow the same kind of pattern. So once you do like 10, 20 questions for a topic, all the other questions that you do after that, you'll be like, oh, that's really similar to this other question I solved. So just trying to solve like 10 really common questions for each topic really gets you into a good mindset of, oh, okay, this is the usual approach for solving an array question. This is the usual approach for solving like a linked list question. Like, okay, maybe I could take multiple passes through a linked list, or maybe I could use like a dummy head for a linked list. So getting through like the top 10 most frequent questions for a problem is really helpful for me. Yeah, that question is the printing by vertical. That is definitely a bit tricky. I think I'm not sure if we have solution guides. I think we have solution guides for it, but if not, I'll try to write up a solution guide for people who are still wondering, because I did hear that a lot of people are struggling through that one. It's definitely one of the hard questions, so don't feel too bad if you're struggling through a lot. I think I would still struggle through a lot if I was put on the spot to do that question right now. How was my interview with Google? It was intense, as I thought it would be. So the good thing about, so I think the way that Google interviews usually work is that they try to warm you up with a easy question, but you might be like, oh man, I got this question, like I'm gonna ace it. But then they have a lot of follow-ups after that. So I think their idea is that they want to probe you until the point where they realize, oh, okay, this is your limit. So it's hard because then you can never feel like you fully got through the interview successfully, right? Because that's kind of their point. They want to see where your breaking point is. So it's hard because at the end of the day, I was like, okay, I definitely didn't get that at all because I failed like all my interviews. I wasn't able to get through like most of them. I did like solve a lot of questions, but I didn't get through like most of them. But at the end, I did get the offer. And I think it's mostly because, let me try to sum them up. Mostly because one, I was able to talk through my mental model for how I went about solving problems. I was able to talk about like different approaches I wanted to take with certain problems. So for example, if I was getting a problem, it's useful to say, okay, I could solve it, with better space complexity than time complexity if I do this approach. But if we're worried about space and we want to sacrifice time instead, I could solve it with a more efficient space and have the algorithm run in a less time efficient approach. So being able to gather requirements for problems to really understand what you're solving for. Because another thing that Google looks for is they try to, sometimes it depends on interviewers, but a lot of times they might give you a question, and part of what the interviewer is looking for is how well you can gather requirements, right? So how well can you define the actual question? So can you think of all the edge cases? Can you think of all the things that might go wrong? If they give you an example, input and output, and the input is already sorted in an array, do you assume that the input is already sorted, or do you ask them, hey, is the input always going to be sorted? So having clarifying questions like that and being able to think of these different cases, I think really helps. That's I'll come up with a better answer when I when I lead the session in like 2 weeks. I'll write these questions down so I can have better answers for them. HackerRank versus LeetCode. I like LeetCode better. I don't know about everybody else, but I personally like LeetCode better just because there's like less fluff in the UI. You kind of just like have a problem and you solve it. So I kind of like LeetCode better. But HackerRank is really good to practice because a lot of companies use HackerRank as a platform to send you these assessment tests, right? So being comfortable with the platform in general is very useful. Yeah, so I did, so this is really interesting. I was gonna talk more about it when I lead the session, but I actually learned Android through a CodePath class. So Nathan, the CodePath founder, was teaching Android like back in 2014. So I took the Android CodePath class in 2014, and then I got a full-time Android job. And then I was an Android developer full-time until this year when I joined Google. So I was doing Android for a long time. Let's see. Sorry, Anish, I don't know what your question about whether you should do both or just one is referring to. Feel free to ask, follow up me with questions on Slack too. I'm always on Slack. If I don't respond to you within 2 days, then ping me again, but I'll definitely respond to anybody who asks me questions or needs clarifying stuff on Slack. Is it worth purchasing LeetCode Premium? It is definitely worth purchasing the LeetCode Premium. If you can afford it, LeetCode Premium is really good because you get access to questions that are locked, but also you get questions tagged by companies, right? So for example, I know Facebook literally pretty much only asks the questions that you see tagged as Facebook on LeetCode. It'll be some variation of the questions you see on LeetCode, but their question bank is pretty like limited. And I don't know, this is when I interviewed like a bit ago, so it might have changed since then, but all the questions I got were like questions I saw on LeetCode tagged with Facebook. So that was very worth it for me, at least. InterviewBit, oh yeah, I actually really like InterviewBit too. InterviewBit has, I think, a nicer UI, but LeetCode just has so many problems. I think the good thing about InterviewBit is they have less problems, so it's easier to focus. Because one of the problems I have with LeetCode is that there's so many problems, I don't even know where to start, right? But at least with InterviewBit, they have like levels of difficulties for each topic, and then they only have about like 20 questions, I think, at most for each topic. So it's a little bit easier for me to adjust to, okay, I can just go through this thing and solve these questions. Do I do Kotlin? I do Kotlin. So Google is really into Kotlin now full time. I was doing a bit of Kotlin before I joined Google, and then Google is really pushing for everybody to do Kotlin right now too. So I do Kotlin full time now. Kotlin is pretty good. Java is a bit verbose and annoying sometimes. I still think I like Java though. I think mostly because I started out with Java, so I'm more familiar with it, but I do like Kotlin a lot too. Oh, I see. So HackerRank versus LeetCode collection of problems. Let's see. Some of the questions I see are HackerRank are like a little bit weird. I don't know what everybody else has experience with, but I think their collection of problems is a little harder to sort through. At least for LeetCode, I could sort by like how frequent each question is seen. And I think that helps me figure out which question I should work on. For HackerRank, it's a little bit harder for me to figure out which questions I should focus on. So I try to do LeetCode. I also really like reading through Cracking the Coding interview, even if it's just for the questions, because I think Cracking the Coding interview book at least gives you like a really good idea of the general patterns for each topic. So they pick out all the problems for you already. And if you just want to look through the index of like problems that are seen for strings or arrays or binary trees, is a really good place to start. There's also free PDF version online. So if you don't want to buy the book, message me and I could share the PDF pirate version with you. Is the Android interview different for a general interview? It is a bit different. I think the Android interview is different in the sense that so each interview round is usually an hour, and usually there's like 10 minutes of chit chat for like, hey, what do you do? Why are you interested in? What have you been doing? But then Android specific interviews, sometimes the interviewer might ask you specific questions like, how would you lay out this type of screen, or how do you handle like memory resource management in an app? And then there was a specific one round that was literally just focused on Android, but still coding. So like coding up Android, code with like an Android specific topic in mind. So it is a little bit different, but mostly still the same, because if you study LeetCode, really you're still going to be doing pretty well. So study LeetCode is the final conclusion. The tech stack that Google uses in Gmail and YouTube. So I don't know about, because there's so much going on at Google, so I don't know what the tech stack they use for most of the stuff is. They are trying to move everything over to Kotlin, but stuff like Gmail and YouTube has been around for a bit, so it is hard to convert like everything to Kotlin. So there might be some parts that are still in Kotlin and some parts that are still in Java, but new development might always be done in Kotlin from going forward. Free PDF, yes. What advice would I give for on-site interviews? Yeah, 4 to 5 hours. So 4 to 5 hours is definitely really tiring. I don't really have any like good advice for that. I think the main thing is to do more practice, because it's one thing to be able to solve a question when you're sitting at home by yourself without anybody judging you after you had a good night's rest, right? It's another thing to solve a problem with someone watching over your back after you've already done 4 hours of this, right? But the more practice you do with this, the better you are. And at some point, it almost becomes a bit of like just memory muscles, right? And if it becomes at that point where you're just like, oh, okay, I've seen this problem before, I know how to do it. Even if you're really tired at the end of the day, even if you're like really hungry, you can still be able to solve this problem. So I think being able to do more practice is really the key. Just get really good at it to the point where even if you're really tired and you're really out of it and you can't really focus, you can still be able to come up with some kind of solution. I think that's the key. Oh, great. Thong already knows about the PDF. So yeah, he can share it with everybody too. The Lunch Buddy is specifically told to not evaluate you. So Lunch Buddy is like your free pass for, hey, what is this company like? Like, what is it usually like dealing with deadlines here? So the Lunch Buddy does not try to evaluate you at all. What's the best time to allocate for LeetCode premium questions? Yeah, so for LeetCode questions, my way of studying is, so it's hard to like just get started studying, right? Because things could get a little hard to get the ball rolling, because some questions you really just have to like see it before once to know how to solve questions like that. So the way I go about studying LeetCode is I try to look at a problem and I try to spend like 10 to 15 minutes giving it a really good honest effort to try to solve it by myself. So I'll read the problem, try to understand what I'm solving for, spend 10 to 15 minutes, try to solve it. If I have a pretty good idea of how to solve it, then I keep going. If I'm like really stuck and I have no idea how to go about solving this problem, I'll read the solution after 15 minutes and be like, oh, okay, this is the kind of approach I could use for this type of question. So once I do that, then I try to actually go back and code up the solution, because it's not enough if you just read the solution for a problem, right? You have to actually be able to do it yourself. And one of the, I think, mistakes that I made when I was studying previously was that I read solution and be like, oh, okay, I know how to do that. Time to move on to the next problem. But that's not enough at all, because it doesn't stick when you're just reading solutions. So you want to read the solution, kind of get the general idea of, oh, okay, this is the kind of like technique and pattern that I need to use. Go back and try to code it yourself. And even if you do that, I try to like revisit problems in a week about like problems I was stuck in to actually do it. Because it's one thing to be able to code up a solution after you read an explanation about how to do it. It's another thing to retain it and actually be able to like bring up that muscle again and do that problem. So if you get really stuck on a problem, try to read the solution, 2, go back and code it up, and then like kind of make a note of it, and then go back to it like 1 or 2 weeks later to actually make sure that you fully understand how to do that problem. Otherwise, one of the problems I faced was like the hardest question I got when I was like coming out of college and doing interviews was like reverse the linked list, which sounds so easy, right? And every time I got the question, I was like, I already know how to do this. But for some reason, every time when I actually had to do it, I just like couldn't do it. Like the pointer bookkeeping was just like really hard for me. So what I should have done is really just like actually sit down and fully understand how to do that problem and practice it a bunch, so I actually get like the good idea of how to do it. Oh, yeah, sorry. On Anisha's point about assessing friendliness, if you're like a total jerk during your lunch and you bring up some like really questionable comments like, oh yeah, that person was like an idiot, I definitely don't want to work with them, then the lunch interviewer is probably gonna like tell your panel and your recruiter that, hey, this person is like not a friendly person at all. It'd be really hard. They bring in a toxic culture. So yes, they're definitely evaluating for that. Sorry, I definitely forgot about that kind of point. But you don't want to be like a total jerk and say stuff like, yeah, my interviewer was an idiot. He didn't get what I was talking about at all. So stuff like that is definitely something that the lunch interviewer would bring up. Yeah, I totally forgot about that point. Let's see. Yeah, I really hate that reverse linked list problem. Yeah, so for the reverse linked list problem, it's always asked with a singly linked list. It's almost never asked with a double linked list. I think just because if you're doing it with a double linked list, it's a lot easier, right? So single linked lists, I think, is usually the way to go. DP, yeah, Google does really like DP. You do have to be pretty familiar with DP. We do cover DP in the later weeks of this class though, so we'll get a lot of practice with DP. And Tony is really good. Tony is like, he has a PhD and he works at Google, and he's the one teaching the dynamic programming weeks, so it's going to be amazing. Is it bad to come up as a know-it-all? Yeah, so one thing that I think I struggle with is I'm a pretty shy person, so I don't like to talk about myself. But the way you have to think about interviews is that it's literally your time to tell everybody else how awesome you are, right? So you do want to bring up, hey, I did all these awesome stuff. I was able to finish this project in my previous internships. You definitely want to bring all those things up, and you want to like show the interviewer how much you know, right? One thing you don't want to do is, how do I put this? So when your interviewer gives you hints, you don't want to be like, I don't think that hint would work at all, because the interviewer is trying to help you succeed in the interview, right? So you don't want to like reject any kind of input they have for you and be like, they might say something like, oh, what if you approach this problem in this way? You don't want to do like, nah, I don't think that would work. My approach is way better. Because if they're offering you a hint, they're definitely trying to help push you towards the right direction. And another thing that the interviewer is always evaluating is this person going to be someone I want to work with? And if you're collaborating on a project together with them, they don't want you to like immediately dismiss everybody else's input. That's not a good thing, right? So just kind of think about, hey, this is the kind of person that I want to be when I'm their coworker, and try to act in that kind of sense. You do want to tell them everything you know. You do want to bring up all the knowledge and be able to contribute, but you don't want to be a total jerk about it. Is it a good idea to revisit some problems you've solved already? It's 1000% a good idea to revisit problems you've solved already. So something that I like realize is that I could solve all these binary tree problems, and then in 3 to 6 months, I'll have forgotten like how I solved them before. So revisiting problems that you solved before, I think, is definitely a good idea. I think something that Tim said before is like, try to do it 3 more times after you solve it the first time. That's how you can get it to really stick. If you haven't been introduced to DP before, I think that's totally fine. We are covering it kind of starting from the beginning. So we're not going to like just straight jump into like really hard DP questions. So you don't have to do too much preparation, but it could be good to like do some reading and solve some like easy dynamic programming questions. If you're like wondering where to find easy dynamic programming questions, feel free to message me and I can give you some resources. I think Google is literally hiring like all the time. So I think they're all like new grad positions are literally always open. Oh, does Google ask for system design for new grad? That's pretty intense. I don't know why they expect new grads to know about system design. I think we're gonna do both bottom up and top to bottom DP. So yeah, it's in the later weeks though. So don't worry too much about it now. Asking for Lewis, what's the best way to study? Do you recommend studying alone? I don't know. I'm pretty introverted, so I like studying alone myself. But it could be better. It's like having a gym buddy, right? If you have a gym buddy, you're more likely to study every day. So if you have a buddy to like study with, it's another motivator to keep you from studying all the time. I think the best way to study is to start with what you think you're weakest in. So for example, every time I get an interview, I hope it's not a binary tree question. So then I try to study more binary tree questions. So I start with the easy questions, kind of just like get warmed up, like bring up my confidence a little bit so I'm not like super dejected. So I start with easy binary tree questions. And then once I'm like, oh, okay, I have the pretty good hang of this, then I'll move on to medium questions. And medium questions is usually where I start to get a little bit stuck, right? I'm like, how do I come up with a more efficient approach for this? So I'll try to code up a solution to the question. And then I'll try to read like other people's solutions. That way I could get a sense of, oh, okay, did I actually solve it in the most optimal way possible? And then I'll try to like make a tiny little note card where I just write out like the general approach for solving this kind of question. And then I'll try to like kind of read over my note cards when I'm bored. And then I'll try to revisit this problem in like 2 to 3 weeks to see if I actually retain how to solve it. And even if I think like I know how to solve a problem, I want to actually be able to code it out, because it's really different. It's a different thing of thinking that you know how to solve a problem versus actually being able to do it, right? You might think you know exactly how to solve it, but once you actually get down to writing the nitty-gritty code, then it turns out to be a completely different story. So actually like coding out your solution is really useful. Oh yeah, I think we do have location-wise study groups. I think we are planning something for that. I'm not sure the exact details of that yet. How long do I recommend to study? I think when I was like really motivated, I was doing like 1 to 2 hours a day after work, which was a little bit tiring, but it's like, it was really hard in the first few weeks to like start studying and all that. But once like the 3rd or 4th week rolled around, it almost felt weird when I didn't do lead code for a day. So I was trying to do lead code every day for like an hour or 2 every day. And the first like 1 to 3rd week, I was like, this is so tiring and I'm not into this at all. But then once I got into like the 4th week, I was like, oh, okay, now I kind of feel weird and lazy if I don't do a lead code question a day. So if you're not doing something like that, I highly recommend you try to start some kind of like study rituals, like going to the gym. It's really hard in the beginning, right? Because you're like, I'm tired. I could be doing so many other things. This is tiring. I'm not sure of the immediate benefits that I'll get from it. But once you go more and more, you'll be like, oh, I feel a lot healthier and I feel a lot more fit. Now I feel kind of like a lazy bum if I don't go every day, right? So it's really hard in the beginning, but try to stick through it for like the first few weeks. And then eventually I think you'll get the hang of it. What's the optimal strategy? I don't know. I think it depends on so I don't know how much this opinion would be endorsed, but it's good to do some practice companies you don't really care about working at first, because then you could get a better idea of, hey, this is the kind of questions I should expect. And also you just get better at interviewing. So interviewing, I feel like, is a skill of its own. So I would recommend applying to companies that you just like literally have no interest in before you actually apply to the companies you care about. That way you can get some good practice. It's like basically free mock interviewing, right? So applying to like companies you don't care about and trying to do some of that first, and then applying to the companies you care about later. So the thing with like startups versus big companies is big companies focus very, very heavily on lead code style questions, versus startups is a little more variety. They might ask you like system design a little bit. If you're applying for a specific like mobile role or a front end role, they might ask you more specific questions on that. So startups, I feel like, tend to have a little bit more variety in what they ask, which makes it a lot more like up to luck on what kind of questions you get and how well you might do in it. Versus big companies, you can almost be certain they're just going to ask you lead code style questions. Unfortunately, I don't think putting Colin on your resume would help your chances a lot. I don't really know what Google looks for on resumes. I could try to find out more about that though. Oh, it is totally difficult to write code on like a document that doesn't compile or has autocomplete. I think the only thing to do to get better at it is to like try coding in a Google Doc. So turn off like capitalizations and automatic indentations and punctuations and like that. And when you're doing lead code, just try to do it in Google Doc or even in lead code. Lead code is a great place to practice because it doesn't have autocomplete and it doesn't have like code completion. It does have bracket matching. But lead code is great to practice on because it doesn't give you all that fancy like editor stuff that you usually get when you're actually coding. So just practicing stuff with that and figuring out, oh, okay, you're actually not that familiar with how to like access a specific element in an array, and then getting really good at that is a good place to start because it is really hard to code when you don't have an editor, right? I don't think we have location-based virtual study groups right now. Maybe we could start something. That'd be cool. Study rituals. So I personally think it's easiest to study first thing in the morning because you get up, you have like a fresh mindset. You're not like bogged down by everything else that happened that day. So just wake up and you're like, okay, drink a cup of coffee or tea or water, and then just start off by doing one lead code. And then you feel really good because you accomplished something first thing in the day already. And 2, you got over the study thing for the lead code already. So I think doing lead code problems first thing in the day is the thing that worked out the best for me. Trying to do it at night was a little harder because it's like I have to think about everything else that happened in the day. I'm tired if I already went to like my internship or my job for the day. So first thing in the morning, wake up like 30 minutes earlier, try to get a little more study time before you go to work. I think that's really helpful. Oh, Google Code Jam. That's intense. Yeah, I never got through Google Code Jam. Oh yeah, it's hard for Python especially because it's based on so like the trade-off between like Python and Java. Java is like super verbose versus Python where indentation is like easily messed up. I definitely find that a lot too. Cool. I will be back in like week 6. I think it's week 4 right now. So I will be back for week 6 or 7. So if you have any questions, feel free to message me on Slack or wait till week 6. I'm always on Slack and I will be answering any questions if you message me directly. I think my name is just Caren, Caren on Slack. So feel free to message me. I will be available for questions weeks from now if you have like questions pop up later. But if you have questions pop up like right now or sometime in the next week, feel free to just message me on Slack. But otherwise, it was good seeing everybody today. It was kind of impromptu, but I'll meet you for sure in week 7. Yeah, let me know if you have any problems, anything, or you face any problems today, or you have questions about the problems we worked on in class as well. Otherwise, I'll see everybody a couple weeks from now.
Thank you, Caren.
Thank you, Caren.
Yeah, it's cool seeing all these people who I recognize from like Android classes too. Some people are like a niche. We'll do more of the Q&A too. All right, I'm gonna head out. See you, everybody.